Welcome back to Farage with me, Martin Daw, me standing in for Nigel. Now, today marks 3 years to the day since Sir David Amess, MP for Southend, was brutally murdered by an Islamist terrorist and left the nation reeling. Earlier today, long-time friends, councillors and MPs gathered to pay their respects to Sir David Amess at a memorial service, as you can see on your screen. His murder highlighted the very real threat our elected representatives face when serving our communities, which is why I was so shocked and angry yesterday to see an illegal migrant making threats against Nigel Farage MP.
Englishman, Nigel Farage, don't talk about me. You not know me. I come to England because I want to marry with your sister. Don't talk about me more. I gonna come to England. I gonna mother.
Well, what, if anything, has been learned about how to keep our MPs safe? And joining me to discuss this now is the former Conservative MP Mike Freer, who narrowly avoided an encounter with Sir David's killer a month before his murder. Mike, thank you very much for joining us on the show. May we start with your recollections of Sir David Amess, who, of course, was a colleague and friend?
David was a remarkable man. I mean, we didn't particularly mix in the same circles. We were probably on different wings of the party, but we shared some very similar views, particularly on the Middle East. But David was almost unique in terms of being somewhat of quite a traditional MP, and he took his constituency enormously to heart. And he was Mr. Southend, and he was unfailingly a gentleman. No one has a bad word to say about him. Even those who may have sparred with him over the years still regarded him as a most wonderful gentleman and an amazing parliamentarian. And I think that's why the Commons felt his murder particularly sharply, is because he was such a genuinely nice man who loved his job and was the epitome of what a constituency member of Parliament should be.
And Mike, particularly post-October the 7th last year, we saw an escalation of hostilities on British streets. We saw Parliament itself barricaded from outside. We saw votes being influenced. And of course, then that led in that period to your own office being firebombed, which led you to stand down ahead of the general election. Would you care to share with us about how that very, very difficult circumstance led you to make that huge decision to stand down?
Well, there comes, I mean, every MP, even today, the MPs are still talking about the low level of abuse that is just part and parcel of the job. But increasingly, what we're finding with social media, and we're finding with obviously people being radicalized online, is the level of abuse is becoming more threatening. And I've never known members of Parliament feel that the need to, if you like, take unusual precautions to keep themselves safe. We all have to be aware of what's around us. But the number of MPs who are worried that their homes aren't safe, that their families aren't safe, their offices aren't safe, changing their behaviour. You know, the accessibility to a British Member of Parliament is quite unique. The fact that we actually, have our surgeries in the middle of our constituencies, we stand in our supermarkets, that is very special. And that is being changed slowly as people have to start taking precautions. And I do think that there's a couple of things we need to address. One is the role of social media and how they largely are unresponsive to complaints when the online content can lead people to become radicalized. And the second thing we need to address is the fact that we have people who are not signing up to our British way of life. I have nobody, I have no problem with anybody wanting to have a good old row with me about my views, but I expect those exchanges of opinion to be respectful. I don't expect people to come to stab me to death or try and set fire to my office if we disagree. And that's something we have to tread carefully on. We don't want to demonise whole sections of the community, but it is a growing problem where we have people who are simply not signing up to our way of life, and that has to be addressed.
And Mike, when you see the video we just showed there of an illegal migrant attempting to get to Britain, issuing a chilling death threat to Nigel Farage, an AK-47 tattooed on his face, do you think we've gone any way forwards on this debate since the tragic murder of Sir David Amess, or do you think actually the threat is as high, if not higher, than it's ever been to our parliamentarians?
I certainly don't have any evidence that the level of threat has reduced. And certainly the man in the film should be identified, found and removed and have no chance of coming to, if any, Western-style democracy, because clearly if he's threatening Nigel Farage, he'll threaten any democratically elected representative, irrespective of the country he's in, and so needs to be swiftly returned from whence he came. People who are genuinely fleeing persecution need to be assessed properly, but those who are simply wanting to come and impose a style of a lifestyle which is not a British way of lifestyle, not our democratic system, have no right to seek asylum. If you want to live in that kind of society, then you don't come to the UK. You know, we are an open and welcoming and tolerant nation, but there are rules. And those rules are that you sign up to our British way of life. And that is something that we need to tread carefully on. I say I don't want to demonise whole communities, but we do have a problem where people are seeking to simply impose their own lifestyle and say, I want to live in Britain, but I want to live my way. No, if you want to live in Britain, you live the British way.
Mike Freer, hear to that. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on the sad passing of David Amess. And I'm joined in the panel, my studio, beg your pardon, still by my panel, and that's Gawain Towler and Joe Phillips. But I'm also joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. State of the Nation, of course, is next. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to turn to you first, Jacob. Of course, David Amess was a colleague and friend of yours. Could I share your thoughts on his the third anniversary of his killing?
When somebody dies, everyone says, what a wonderful man. With David, this was true. He never had an unpleasant word to say about anybody. I got on with him very well because I was on his wing of the party, and David was also very Catholic. His faith was tremendously important to him. He stood up and fought for his constituents. He managed to get Southend made a city. I think the one thing, though, is we should remember David was very, very open to his constituents, who he adored. And it would be tragic if the response to David's death is that MPs hide themselves away. I think it's very important that we maintain that Mike was talking about, that unique openness that we've got in this country, that politicians and the people are one, rather than politicians being a separate caste. And I hope in memory of David we will maintain that whilst recognising that there are tragic risks.
Beautifully put. Now, I've got a quick 20 seconds to talk about what's on your show. Of course, that's coming next.
What I'm going to be talking about is that we can stop climate change by apparently putting things in the sky that cool us down, like volcanoes. So instead of stopping us doing things and freezing us and making us poor, we can actually mitigate through science. It's very exciting.